Well, good Tuesday morning inspiration for today, family. I love that you tuned in. I think it's an important week. It's not as fun a week as we often have, but I think it's so important. I know it's important to the Lord that you know these things that we're talking about. The general title for this week is going to be called Unmasking the Occult and exposing the things that Satan uses to draw people in. And it may or may not be for their soul. That's what the battle is for. And we talked about that yesterday. Because if you're a follower of Christ, your soul is going to live in heaven. But how you live right here on earth can be influenced and diminished, both in power and effectiveness, by falling into any of these occult practices that now we're going to talk about specifically. And I even mentioned or promised yesterday that today we would talk about astrology. Now, when I say that word, I don't know how you react. Often, even Christians will kind of say, oh, astrology, well, that's nothing. I read it for fun. I remember when I was a kid, my grandmother would read, who was the most Christian influencer in my life at the time. She would read me the astrology. And it was in every paper in America. And it's estimated that up to 50 million people read their astrology every single day. And those 50 million don't mean evil by it. They don't even know, they don't even think about it. But astrology has been one of Satan's deceptives, well, for over 3,000 years. We know that because the prophet Isaiah, which I will read you a little bit later, wrote about how wicked they are. And part of the sorcerers that he was warning against, that God's people should never deal with it. Astrology, well, let me just read one of the quotes here that Dr. John Eichenberg and John Walden in their book, The Facts on Astrology, the astrological art is held to be the key to all the occult sciences. It's the base on which all other things that we'll get to are. But they all have this in common. All the occult practices provide something that only God would know. It usually is the future. It can be other things, such as we'll get to those later this week in terms of contacting the dead and so forth. Astrology is probably the most dangerous because it introduces you to other similar practices. And it's been around since the very beginning. In Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, you know that story, that the people built the tower. There was only one language, and they said, we want to build it so high that it'll reach into heaven. It was man's pride trying to build that. And what was at the core of it? Well, there were 7 levels, and each one of those 7 levels talked about the 5 known planets that were at that time, and 2 others that dealt with the sun and moon, which were their objects of worship. And so then they made them colored for each god that each one of those levels honored. And yet, God said what in the 10 Commandments? They'll have no other gods before him. So these were like an idol worship. And the stars and planets become idol worship if they replace God. And in fact, if you in a form of worship, if they are directing a person's life, then you'd be worshiping the creation rather than the creator, who didn't put the stars in a certain way for you to know the future. No, he didn't. He gave you the Bible, and he went to the cross, which is why I have this as my background for today. Let me read you what the prophet Isaiah said about them 3,000 or more years ago. Isaiah 47 at verse 13, and he says, all the counsel you have received has only worn you out. Let your astrologers come forward, those stargazers who make predictions month by month. It was that way back then. And what does he say of them? Let them save you from what's coming upon you. They're not going to do it. Surely they are like stubble. The fire will burn them up. They cannot even save themselves from the power of the flame. Their destiny is the flame, the flames of hell. And you want nothing to do with that. So it's not a joke. It's not, your future is not in the planets or the way that the sun aligns with whatever. Why would it? And all the people born on your birthday or even in your month have the same future? None of this is logical. Why is it accepted at all? Your guess is as good as mine, but it seems that it's because, one, people want to know the future. And two, they don't want to look to God to know that future, even though it's laid out in the Bible so clearly. We need to look to God alone for guidance in our daily lives. God directs us, not charts of stargazers. Even reading your horoscope is something that you want to leave alone. Walk away from it. Repent of any association of the astrology or any other aspects. And why? Here's the overriding passage on this whole week. Deuteronomy chapter 18 at verse 10 says, let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery or interprets omens, which is be the stars, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or a spiritist, or who consults the dead. The nations listen to those types who practice sorcery and divination. But as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so. Has not permitted you to do so. And I know, just like, I told a story of my grandmother reading my daily horoscope oftentimes. She did not mean evil by it. And fortunately, we didn't go any further in any form than that. But it can, and it often can. Boy, if that can tell me my future, maybe I need to go to a fortune teller. Maybe I need to have my palm. Well, we're going to talk about some specifics the next couple days that might well open your eyes. So God bless, walk closely with your Lord, and I'll see you tomorrow.
And I won't worry about tomorrow.